Take one and only.
Confidence, love it.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Age of Truth TV. I'm Lucas Alexander in Copenhagen, Denmark. It's the 11th of October 2018, and our special guest today has become like a superstar in his unusual field. From not being able to fill a phone booth with people who wanted to hear him speak, he's now packing arenas like Wembley Arena in London and venues all over the world. A controversial legend in his own time, who has in a way been helped by massive public ridicule to overcome and eliminate any fear, especially the fear of what other people think. It is a great pleasure to welcome back to the show the one and only David Icke. Thank you very much and welcome back.
Pleasure, Lucas.
For 30 years, you've been informing the world about a lot of problems, and that has caused a lot of reactions, and you've tried to come up with a lot of solutions. And in our first interview in 2011, A Beginner's Guide to David Icke, controversial icon, we covered a lot about your background and your past and how you had this spiritual awakening,
right.
Betty Shine, Peru, the Terry Wogan show, and can it really be real that you believe that there are reptilians and all of these things?
Yeah.
So, we don't want to really talk about that, although we will go into certain details and descriptions.
All right.
You've said, we live in a matrix, a holographic projection in a multidimensional matrix with an infinite number of universes. So, how do we escape being stuck in this matrix? And the first question really begins at the end. What happens to us when we die and our soul leaves the body?
Well, we can only kind of look at that from the evidence and the kind of intuitive knowing that we kind of put together and see if one matches the other. But it's very clear that consciousness, which is what we are, you know, people say, what is this I? And what we're told the I is all these labels that are given us and we give ourselves. Our name, our sex, our race, our religion, our income bracket. But these are not what we are. These are what we're experiencing. It's what that state of awareness is experiencing. And this body, which I call a biological computer, operates obviously in a much more advanced way, but in basically the same way as the computer decodes the internet. See, there'll be Wi-Fi in this room, and yet where is it? You know, if you said to someone who knows nothing about computers, you know, there's a field of energetic information in this room which you can tap into anywhere in the world and tap into this great global reality we call the internet, the World Wide Web. If people didn't know about computers or Wi-Fi, they'd say you were crazy. They'd say you're mad. I mean, and it's the classic five-sense reaction. I can't see it, so it can't exist. But once you say to people, or people know, as they do now, about computers and Wi-Fi, and you say there's information in this room and you can tap into it and all that stuff, then people just nod and say, yeah, well, everyone knows that. But this is the point. The only difference between you're crazy and, yeah, I know about that, is knowledge, which is fundamental to how people's perceptions are of everything, including the nature of life, are squeezed into a tiny band of the sense of the possible by lack of information. This is the key thing, you know, perception is everything. Our perceptions dictate what we'll do, what we won't do, what we'll say, what we won't say, what we'll challenge, what we won't challenge, what we'll accept, what we won't accept. And where do our perceptions come from? Information received. And this is where censorship is so, and why censorship is so dangerous, is because it's feeding a perceptional state based on information received and shutting out any other information that would give people the possibility of a different perception of the same situation. You see on kind of non-mainstream channels stories about ghosts, stories about the paranormal. And they invariably start with a line saying, which they have to put on, which says this is for entertainment purposes only. In other words, don't take it seriously. Now, why is someone's endless people's, millions and millions and millions of people's experience of the paranormal, the unexplainable according to 5 sense normal, why is that less valid? And you don't take that seriously when compared with 5 sense normal. Oh yeah, that's the real world. You take that seriously. And this is another way, you see, that this whole idea of the eternity of our awareness is kept from us. Because basically what we're given is a choice to believe that this world is a cosmic accident. We are a cosmic accident. As someone brilliantly said, to say that this reality and everything within it and the body and everything emerged by accident is the equivalent of a hurricane blowing through a scrapyard and assembling a jumbo jet. You know, I mean, it's just crazy, man. Of course, it's not happened by accident, but that's what we're pressured to believe. So the choice is, this world is all there is. Life's a bitch, and then you die, and the lights go out, and that's it. Because the body is who we are. And why is that? Because they want us in body-focused 5 sense perception, which is very, very limited in our understanding of self and our understanding of reality. And the other choice, of course, if you want to accept that life doesn't end at the end of the body cycle, is to believe in a religion and some God sitting on a throne, usually with a beard, will judge you. And this God is so loving, there's hell and damnation if you don't do what he says in your brief 70 years and 10. And by the way, all you need to know what God wants so he'll judge you right is between the 2 covers of this book, whatever religious book it may be. So these are the choices, and you go, crazy, man, crazy. But the alternative, which is that we are awareness, a state of being aware. And my awareness now is aware of you and aware of this room, because my awareness is having its attention focused through this biological computer on this tiny band of frequency, ludicrously narrow frequency we call visible light. And therefore, unless we can expand our awareness beyond the 5 senses, which is what the pressure is not to do, then basically life appears to be only what you perceive when you look through your eyes. Now, if you think that, according to mainstream science, the electromagnetic spectrum is 0.005% of what exists in the universe, that's what they project. And visible light, which is the only frequency band that we can see, is a tiny sliver of the 0.005%. I mean, basically, humans can see nothing. The idea, however, is to persuade us that, A, that's not the case. That's why you don't see programs about it, very rarely, or newspaper articles about it, very rarely. But to focus our attention only in the 5 senses. Now, that means, first of all, if we don't believe in religion and life after death and being judged, then we believe the lights go out, or we don't know what happens. And what does that create? Fear of death. And fear of death gives your power away in so many ways. Like to doctors. "Oh, doctor, please keep me here a bit longer. Give me a pill or something, because I don't know what happens and stuff." And then there's the religious, always God going to judge me and all this stuff. So there's this fear of death. And from that fear of death comes fear of so much else. But when you come from this point of perception that what we are is this state of awareness having an experience, a series of experiences, through this body lens which focuses our attention in this band of frequency. And all that happens at death is that vehicle ceases to function, ceases to be that, if you like, computer decoder of this reality. And that which has been observing through it leaves. And that's what happens with near-death experiences. I mean, you look at the millions and millions of people now who've had near-death experiences when their body has died and then been revived. And they talk about what happened in that period in between. First of all, time disappears, because time and weight and motion and all these things that we take for granted in this reality are only information decoded by the brain. And the brain is all operating in this band of frequencies of five senses. Once you leave, what do these near-death experiences say? Suddenly, there was this massive expansion of consciousness. I could see past, present, and future in the same now. I was aware of multiple realities in the same now. Why? Because the state of awareness that is the true eternal I, no form, no body, just awareness, has been released from the body's focus of attention. It's like being released from the computer. And then that awareness, depending on its vibrational state, which comes from its perceptual state, the two are absolutely connected, then goes and explores another dimension of reality outside of this body.
What dimension is that? What reality is that? What happens when the soul leaves, let's say, this realm?
It's all to do with frequency. Mm-hmm. This is why Albert Einstein said, all you've got to do is get the frequency you want, and then you'll get what that frequency represents.
So you can decide.
Well, yeah, but it comes from your perception. I mean, I go into this in the talks and in the books, in detail. I go into it in the talks. It's really important. If you are in a state of depression or a state of anger or a state of hatred, these things are represented by frequencies. If you're in a state of joy and empathy and love in its various forms, then you are in a high frequency, because your emotional, mental, perceptual state dictates your frequency. And your frequency dictates, and how expanded it is, and the nature of the frequency dictates what you connect with. So if you say I self-identify with being this, what I call point of attention with an infinite awareness, that you are infinite awareness, all that is, has been, and ever can be, all possibility, having an experience, then that perceptual state will connect you with the greater awareness, the scientists call the quantum field of possibility and probability, in a much more expanded way. So you have therefore the potential to manifest, decode out of that potential and possibility enormously greater.
And steer your own the direction you want to go.
Yeah, but what you'll do is you will be able to therefore manifest possibilities in your life and means of creation in your life on a much more expanded way than someone who is in a perceptual state that says, I'm little me, I've got no power, I have to look up to them because they know what they're doing and I don't. That is a very narrow, very low frequency perceptual state. So you will interact with this field of possibility and probability in that frequency band that is represented by your limited state of perception and limited state of self-identity. Thus, what you will create is another self-fulfilling prophecy, just like the expanded state of awareness. And that self-fulfilling prophecy will be little me perception becomes little me life. Little me I have no power experience.
But you also talk about we are living in a matrix. So if a lot of people who died or were, well, declared dead after an accident or something and saw their own body, they all say practically the same thing, that they went to this tunnel of light, and they went into this great white light frequency. And if they were a Christian, they saw Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha or whatever, but it was a feeling of bliss, something incredible. And then they could choose to reincarnate again and go back in another body on Earth. Is that like a reincarnation recycling factory, as some people are talking about now, like a fake kind of keeping souls in the matrix?
Well, I have read about this, and I have written about this, and I've read accounts of people about their experiences. And it's my conclusion over many years that reincarnation is a trap. It's not that it doesn't exist, although I don't think it's quite the same as it's explained. It's a bit more subtle, maybe, but I do think it's a trap. And you see, when I was writing my last book, Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told, I looked at when reincarnation began, when it became a concept. And it became a concept within only a few thousand years. And as I write in other books and I talk about in the talks, there's very clearly, this has come from mainstream academics, there's very clearly a point about 6,000 years ago, 4,000 BC, when humanity changed dramatically. It changed dramatically in a way that cannot be explained by what they call evolutionary explanations that take what we call time. I keep saying what we call and all these things because we literally do live in a world that is nothing like we think it is. But reincarnation has come in relatively recent times after this transformation of human consciousness, which took us basically from a much more expanded view that we're connected to everything into the five senses. Mm-hmm. I mean, one cultural historian who I quote in the books called that point 6,000 years ago the Great Change. The greatest change that has been established that humanity went through. There was the academic who wrote the book The Fall about this, called Steve Taylor from Leeds University, he calls it the new psyche. A new psyche came to replace the old psyche.
Just a couple of thousand years
Now, this
ago.
would have been 6,000 years ago that this started, and it happened very quickly. So within this period of 6,000 years, I've always had, well, since I started to understand this stuff, I've been very wary about it, because there was some kind of manipulative force started to impose itself in this period, probably before, but certainly in 6,000 years. So you look at reincarnation, and it comes out of the East, which is where this force very much located for at least at one point. And out of this force came the religions. See, out of Asia came Hinduism and many other religions, and another center for this force, this takeover, was the Middle East. And so you had Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all coming out of there. The religions came out of the centers of manipulation.
But they all want the same thing. They all want you to go to heaven or the light or whatever. And they all want you to put you in the same place.
Yeah, and they also want you to believe that all you have to understand to know the world and yourself and everything you need to know is within the cover of books. As I've written before, these religions appear to be different, but it's actually the same program, just under different names. I go to church. A person tells me what God wants and what will happen if I don't.
But the same thing in spirituality, New Age, like going to the light.
Yeah, all that stuff. So,
if that's a trap,
if you leave the body in a perceptual state because of what's the program you've taken on, and you fiercely have belief systems which are driving your perception, then you can be caught in this trap. Now, what do they say in the Eastern religions? with reincarnation. You have to keep having experiences on Earth to grow to a point, and what do they call it? Basically a vibrational frequency point where you can leave and break out of the reincarnation cycle, right? That's what they say. Now,
Nirvana.
Yeah, you can break it out. Now, this is my question. If you take the mainstream science projection currently of the size of the universe, then planet Earth, by comparison, is a billionth of a pinhead, right? Right. Now,
That's not a lot.
so let's just break this down. You have to keep having lives on the equivalent of a billionth of a pinhead within only one universe, never mind all the other realities that exist beyond it in infinity. And you have to keep reincarnating onto this a billionth of a pinhead to learn how to get out of this reality into another one. Excuse me, that's crazy, man. Again, what were we doing?
You would not want to return to this place, would you? Or would you?
Unless there was something, a contribution you could make, then yes. But the point is that beyond this pinhead, which is actually not a planet, it's an information source, a narrow band of frequency. That's our reality, a band of frequency. And when you look at the night sky, you're looking at a tiny, tiny dot, really, of even this galaxy, never mind the universe itself. So I come back to it. You keep having to reincarnate onto this billionth of a pinhead to evolve. It's nonsense. So what could be happening?
If it is a trap, could that be what you have described as archons?
Yeah.
Who are part of trapping this? And please describe, what is an archon? Is an archon the same as a demiurge or a jinn or a demon or an angel? What are all those things?
What I have been suggesting now since the early turn of the millennium is that we live in the equivalent of a virtual reality computer game. It's not a coincidence that the physics of computer games and the mathematics of computer games mirror the physics and mathematics of this world. And so when I first started writing about this, there was a guy at Oxford University called Nick Bostrom, who was also speculating that maybe this is a virtual reality. What has happened, if you notice, in the last 2 or 3 years, more 2 than 3, is mainstream scientists have started to come out one after the other and say, well, actually, when we look at it, it does look like we do live in a simulation. You've got Silas Bean and his team at Bonn University. You've got James Gates, a former science advisor to Obama, whose team found that the basic mathematics that you find in computer browsers and internet browsers are found in the energetic fabric of our reality, that there are error-correcting codes they've found, which are the same as those in computers, which hold information in a stable state. So if it's getting out of kilter, it kicks it back. You have Rich Terrell, a NASA scientist in computers, who came out, made public statements, did public interviews, saying that in his opinion, we could very well live in a simulation created by what he called aliens.
Right.
And I nearly fell off my seat when I heard that, because that's basically what I've been pointing out.
But is an archon an alien? What we would call, it's an interdimensional, non-physical being.
Yeah.
Huh?
What we call aliens, what we call extraterrestrials, are not just entities with big black eyes and grey bodies and all the rest of it, or not only reptilian. They are, of course, if you're extraterrestrial, you are not of the earth, and you can take infinite forms. This is a big thing to get through. What we call intelligent life does not have to have 2 arms, a head, 2 legs, and a torso. That's just the vehicle for that intelligent life, coming back to how we started, which is a state of awareness. So in its base form, and the Gnostic believers, the Gnostic writers from basically 2,000 years ago in Egypt, who left their writings, and they were found in Egypt at a place called Nag Hammadi in 1945. They say that the archons in their base form are simply a state of energy, what I would call a state of awareness.
Never physical.
But they can be.
Okay.
Because what have we been talking about? That the real I is awareness, a state of awareness, which becomes embodied and then experiences through a vehicle till the vehicle ends its cycle, and then it leaves, what we call death. Now, that's not just true of the human experience, that's true of all experience in form.
So can you only be or take physical form in a on a three-dimensional frequency?
Well, no, because it's the information you project. You can take any form you like. I mean, when you get into the higher realms of frequency, which is not as dense as this one, what you think is what you are.
So that can be physical as well.
You could make yourself look outwardly whatever you like, just through a projection of your own consciousness. But you see, this is the point. Although it seems like it, there is no physical.
No.
This is not physical. Quantum
because it's atoms. Huh?
But atoms have no solidity.
Yeah.
Atoms have no solidity, so how can they make a physical world? They don't. Why? Because there isn't a physical world. It's holographic.
And that's why I talk about the holographics.
And the holographic world that appears to be outside of us actually only exists in here when we decode it from an energetic information source in exactly the same way, in principle, as a computer decodes from Wi-Fi, completely different form of information, into what we see on the screen.
Or a cell phone without a cord. Or
our screen, this, is here. So even the physical is a diversion. It's not really there. But the thing is that this simulation is holding us in a perceptual servitude. And basically at the 5 sense level of awareness, that's where we're really talking about with this simulation. However, if there was a situation where you left the body and immediately, no matter what perceptual state you were in when you left, you realize what the game was, well, you're not going to keep, if you like, refilling your simulation, are you? People are going to leave and say, crikey, bloody hell.
But could these archons trap you then even?
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm going on to say. So what I think reincarnation is, and again, the Archon writings by the Gnostics support this, is that it's not just at the level we call physical, 5 sense, this world, that this simulation operates, but other levels as well. So if you leave the body and you are not in an expanded state of consciousness, then your perception will hold you in a low vibrational state, which will stop you leaving other levels of this, quote, matrix. And it's from those other levels that this reincarnation cycle comes. And the Gnostics wrote about this, as well as many other people over the ages. But if you leave the body in an expanded state, in awareness of what you are...
You can go back to what source, people call God.
Where you can go is beyond the matrix. And what lies there is infinity of possibility. See, this world that we're living in is only one set of possibilities within infinite possibility. So there is a trap. So when you look at it, if you can get people to believe, what is a belief system? It's a perceived system. Your belief dictates your perception dictates your frequency dictates where you can operate and where you can't operate. And therefore, if you can get people to believe in a religion where you're going to be judged by a god, well, when you leave, you're going to be expected to be judged by a god, and that reality will manifest. But if you believe in reincarnation, then the same thing
Yeah.
happens. You're still in the trap.
It's the same trap.
It's the same trap.
How does an Archon function? Is the Archons connected to, superior to, lower than, or similar to the reptilians?
Well, I say that, you see, the reptilian form is an outward body like this. Now, within this human body, you have consciousness that is lovely, kind.
So there are good reptilians, so to speak?
I'm sure there are. And you have people in the human body that are okay and all right. And you have psychopaths. Now, what it seems from my research over 30 years is that this reptilian genetics, because of its nature, and just as this body, this biological computer, decodes information in a certain way, so different forms decode it in certain ways. It's much more likely to be towards the psychopathic side, not entirely, not at all, but it's more that way. I remember a Zulu shaman called Credo Mutwa said to me a long, long time ago, who of course, the Zulus have this concept of what they call the Chitahuri, the children of the serpent people who are manipulating the world, something you find all around the world. And he said to me very early on, this would be back in the 1990s, if you want to understand the cabal manipulating the world, study the reptile. When you look at reptilian animals, crocodiles, alligators, etc. I went to crocodile farms and alligator farms in various places. Australia is one of them. And I watched the demonstration with the guy in the pen.
Cold-blooded predators, huh?
Yeah, and also incredibly computer-like. Incredibly computer-like. I was in Australia, and this guy was in the pen with these crocodiles, and he was holding a stick, and he said over and over again, "I'm going to do this now, and when I do, the crocodile will do this." And every time it was exactly the same. It was computer-like.
Like a computer program.
Yeah, like a computer program. They're very, very computer-like.
So, the same with this highly evolved reptilian race that you've been talking about for so many years.
Well, highly evolved in the sense of technologically very much more advanced. It doesn't mean necessarily more. Well, it doesn't mean more spiritually evolved. And so, what was interesting to me? Well, many things were interesting to me, but when I spent a lot of time reading these texts from the Gnostics from Egypt, that was supposed to have been put in this earthen jar about maybe 400 BC. The writings are said to go back maybe to 100 BC. Sorry, AD, and 400 AD. I was interested to read the descriptions of them when they were, after they were found in Egypt in 1945, where they're describing archons and their base state being consciousness and energy in their base state, which absolutely fits what I'm saying. But this is what they said.
Well, demonic?
Yeah,
or
but what they said was, yes, basically.
Negative. Not a positive frequency.
No, very negative. But what they said in these writings is that the archons can take form, and the two forms they use the most are reptilian. This is long after I've been talking about the reptilians, and a form that looks like a grey fetus, as we would call it, with big black eyes.
Like the Greys.
That's the Greys.
That's the Greys. Okay.
And these two forms would appear to be the dominant ones in the background, beyond the tiny frequency band of human sight, that are manipulating our reality. And they're doing it through a network of families that are basically hybrid bloodlines, part human and part these bloodlines. The way that the reptilians act, their lack of empathy, their psychopathic nature, in terms of the way that they abuse humanity, comes from the psychopathic consciousness that is working through that form. And that's what the Gnostics called archons.
You've become so controversial and ridiculed and everything about talking about the reptilians and the shape-shifting.
Yeah, I know.
And what you're really talking about is a frequency change, a holographic transformation, which is not physical but will appear physical. See, we actually discussed that in our last interviews.
There is no physical, you see. I mean, because this is the big thing I mentioned earlier. If you can focus people's perception on the five senses, where everything appears to be physical, and you can tell them that everything is physical, even though atoms have no solidity, therefore they can't create physicality, then so many things that are happening from that perception become impossible. Because if this was a solid body and things were solid and physical, then shape-shifting, somebody moving from one shape to another, from a non-human form to a human form, would be impossible. Of course it would. You can't do that with physicality. But when all you're doing is changing the energetic field that you're projecting, then you can. You know, if you were one of these hybrids and you were projecting at me now your human field, that is what I'll be decoding. If you shifted to the other part of your hybrid field, I'm not saying you, but I'm saying these people.
Thank you.
Then suddenly I am now decoding that. Now, to my perception, you've just moved physically from one form to another, but you haven't. The shift has taken, the physical shift, the perception of a physical shift has happened in here. Just like switching channels on a television or flicking from one website to another.
But if you touch somebody who is able to do that shapeshift you talk about, can you touch them and they can feel things in the same way that regular people can?
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same situation, except that, you know, if you're human and only human, then the only field you can project is human.
Yeah.
But if you are these hybrids, you have these hybrids that have dual energy fields, one human, one not human, then they can shift between the two.
But they're still born as human?
Oh, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
because it's a complex thing, and in order for people to really understand where the whole thing is, because and then they'll say, oh, why did this person, let's not mention names, or why did they choose that face if they were reptilian?
I'll give you an answer to the question. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that movie called Avatar?
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, what happened? You had the American military.
They were rigged up to a
symbolic of this non-human invading race. Mm-hmm. They wanted to take over the society of the blue people, the Na'vi, on that moon planet. And they couldn't do it directly. So what did they do? They took on outer bodies that looked like the blue people. Mm-hmm. And they infiltrated their society. And the blue people thought they were dealing with their own because they looked like them. But behind that bodily shield, mask, they weren't them. And that is exactly the principle of what's going on.
And a lot of things you've talked about, a lot of things are actually exposed in Hollywood movies.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So next question is, and this connects to everything else you've been talking about, how significant is the planet Saturn? And in what way is Saturn connected to Satan?
Well, this is such a massive subject, and I go into it in detail in the books. It has to be done at length.
I know, and you do that for hours and hours in your talk.
Yeah, but it has to be done at length to really be understood. But I'll give you a summary.
Please do.
The rings of Saturn are not natural. There was a guy called what was his name?
What was his name?
Oh, what's his name? He wrote the book called Ringmakers of Saturn. He'll come to me in a second.
Yeah.
And he looked. He was basically an insider. He had a high security clearance for 30 years. And he looked at the first pictures coming back from the Voyager spacecraft that went out to Saturn in the very early 1980s. And he compared the pictures, and he saw the rings were changing, not over thousands of years, but minutes. And then the Cassini mission to Saturn started around the early 2000s, and he compared the Voyagers to the Cassinis, and he saw vast differences, but he saw other things too. And some of the pictures are in my books. And they're NASA pictures, and NASA have never talked about them. And they are what he calls electromagnetic vehicles, not spaceships, electromagnetic vehicles. And on the pictures, they look a bit like a big cursor on a computer. And they are in the rings, and all this stuff is pouring out of them, which he calls exhaust.
Creating the
rings. No. And there are pictures of rings half finished, of rings still being constructed. And then you see pictures of these electromagnetic vehicles on NASA pictures all around Saturn, and they are enormous.
But can we trust NASA pictures?
Well, you can maybe trust NASA pictures they don't want to discuss that this guy has put out. Mm-hmm. And you can certainly see that the rings are not developing over enormous amounts of time, because, as he points out, they're changing all the time. And interestingly, in the Gnostic writings about the Archons, what we were just talking about, that there is a trap, and when you leave the body, you only get out from the trap when you get beyond Saturn. And putting it all together, as I do in detail in the books, those rings are broadcasting something. The moon's involved as well, I'm sure, which is why this enormous anomalies about the moon that no one can explain shouldn't be there. It's far too big to be going around a planet this small. But these rings they're almost, you could consider them a broadcast transmitter. They're broadcasting an information source. And for me, they're part of the broadcasting system that's broadcasting the information that we're decoding as the simulation. And then look at, these bloodlines, they came out of Sumer, Babylon, Egypt. And then they moved up into Europe, these hybrid bloodlines. And one of the places they stopped off at and created was Rome and the Roman Empire. Who was the biggest god of Rome? Saturn. And
Saturnalia.
Saturnalia, that's our Christmas. In Rome, they had this festival where they had decorated trees, they hung holly and exchanged presents, and had this big debauchery festival. And in the same run-up to the period that we call Christmas, and look at Santa. What's that an anagram of? Satan, Santa, and so
don't tell your children that.
And then you look at Saturn, Satan, and then you find
Saturday.
Yes, that's Saturn Day. Of course, the religious day of Judaism. You have Sunday, the religious day of. It's all connected to the planets. Look at the Satanists in the big satanic rituals. One of their centers of worship, focuses of worship, is Saturn. So you put all this together, plus a lot more, and Saturn is a very, very significant planet in this arrangement that we call our reality. And the moon, again, is very much part of that as well.
Your research has led you to understand that they use Satanism and dark energies in ways that nobody could really imagine. Ordinary people could not imagine this could actually be real. And this is what you talk about is happening on a massive scale. Why is that? Why do they use Satanism? And how do we really know that they do that?
Well, first of all, I've talked to I've been on this road a long time, 3 decades now, and I've talked to so many people around the world who are either former Satanists or took part against their will in satanic rituals. And so you just build up this body of common descriptions and common evidence over a long period of time. You don't just meet someone and they say, this happened, and you say, okay, I believe you. You have to cross-reference it, you have to question it, you have to see that someone said this in Australia and someone said this in California, and they're describing different rituals, and often same people in terms of famous people. They're describing the rituals and what happens and why in the same way. And so you build up this body of evidence. And also, with these hybrid bloodlines, when I've tracked them and researched them deeply, they invariably lead into Satanism, and they lead into pedophilia, which is in many ways an expression of Satanism. And so you get people like...
and they are what you could call the Illuminati?
Yeah, the illuminated ones. They sometimes call themselves, I call them the hidden hand. There's many names for them. But Stanley Kubrick was trying to tell us things in a movie called Eyes Wide Shut, a portrayal of these elites in a long ritual that was featured in the film. People with the masks on and the Satanism and all that stuff. And he shot it, not by accident, in a Rothschild mansion in England, because he's trying to tell us something. And he was describing what I'm describing in my books, basically, how there is this elite that run the world, and they take part in these satanic rituals, and they're involved in massive programs of mind control. Nicole Kidman, who plays one of the stars of the film, she plays a lady who clearly, from the way the movie goes, is under mind control. And the children at the end, the two, clearly is indicating Kubrick that they're going to go into the same program of mind control. So he was trying to tell us something there. And what happened is he played it, or it was played for the Warner Brothers
executives,
bigwigs, who were horrified by it and demanded that 25 minutes of it was taken out. Kubrick refused, and apparently he had a contract that allowed him to refuse. And then suddenly, Kubrick dies, and 25 minutes is removed. And even that which remains
shows quite a lot.
It's quite a lot. So what was in the 25 minutes? So, the great challenge that people like me have is that what is happening in the world is so fantastic, so far out, so out there, compared with how people in this squeezed perception are told is happening, that is a chasm that's very difficult for people to get over. But more and more people are now looking at things they would have waved away before, which is very encouraging.
So, on the topic of mind control, is that the most important weapon used on the population today that everyone needs to know about? And let's also talk about MK Ultra mind control, trauma-based mind control, and Project Monarch. You have been interviewing a couple of really extraordinarily, let's say, wild people.
Well, loads of them, actually. Loads and loads of them.
Loads of them, actually. But you made a couple of them very famous, at least one called Arizona Wilder.
Yeah.
In an interview you conducted for your book, The Biggest Secret, from 1998, where you first revealed information about the reptilian alien races that can shapeshift with sophisticated holographic techniques. And this Arizona Wilder, whose real name supposedly is Jennifer Ann Green, or later Jennifer Keeley. You made a video with her in a video called Revelations of a Mother Goddess, which was extraordinary to watch, something that I don't think the world had ever heard about before. Was that real? is she real or was she a fraud? And in what way were you connected? Because it seems recently she supposedly went out in a written statement, though, claiming that she was still under mind control when she conducted that interview with you with somebody called Brian Desborough.
That's right.
Can you talk about what that whole thing was?
Well, yeah, absolutely. But let me make this point first of all. I didn't come to the conclusions about some reptilian race manipulating human society because of Arizona Wilder. She was a contributor to that information source, but only a contributor. She wasn't the reason. I don't work like that. But what happened was that Brian Desborough was basically a scientist. I think he worked for Boeing. And he set out in the 60s, because he was a Christian, to prove that Christianity was true. And it was historical fact. He said to me, in no time I realized it wasn't. And he went through this great transformation of, well, if I've believed in Christianity all my life, and now I realize so quickly when I just check it that the historical basis is wrong, what the heck else is happening that I believe that is actually not true? And as synchronicity would have it, he called me sometime later, and he said, I've met somebody and you ought to meet. And by this time, the reptilian thing had already come into my life, not in America even, but in Britain, when people were telling me about this, but also in America, because how this started for me, because my life, when I had my own big awakening experience in 1990-91, my life became this synchronistic journey where coincidence was happening all the time. And I went out to America in 1996 and talking to nobody. And as I traveled around a different place, talking next to nobody every day, in a period of about 15 days, I met about 12 separate people in different places who told me the same thing, that they'd experienced seeing someone look human, then turn into a reptilian type figure, and then back again.
One was Kathy O'Brien also, huh?
Yeah, but she experienced it, but she read it in another way. But no, Kathy O'Brien was much earlier. These 12 people were people I'd met before. And what you do is, when they tell you this, what you don't do, unless you absolutely know from your own previous experience that it's true or not true, you don't say load of rubbish. You say, interesting, back burner.
Let's talk about it. Is that what you mean? Let's
talk about it. Let's question it. Let's see what evidence there is. And then let's put it on the back burner and see what comes up. Mm-hmm. And then you meet someone else. Then you meet someone else, someone else, someone else, someone else. Then you go to Australia and meet other people. And this is all before The Biggest Secret came out, which is the first time I'd gone public in any of this. So these people were coming at me, telling me their stories, blind. They had no idea, because I didn't tell them, that I'd come across previous stories that were like they were telling me. So you build up this body of evidence, you see. And because you're not having a preordained belief system going, no, you let it form. So by the time I came across Arizona Wilder, and the reason that Brian Desborough called me and said, you ought to come meet this lady I've met, is because he knew that we were talking about the reptilians before her. So I went over, and she was incredibly compelling. She showed me some of the ritual paraphernalia that she'd used in the rituals. And her name, she called herself then Jennifer Green, because she said that she had been put under mind control and trauma-based mind control, which breaks up the mind into a honeycomb of compartments, which is how it's basically done, by Joseph Mengele. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death in the concentration camps in Germany, in Auschwitz. And that...
Operation Paperclip.
Yeah, he'd been brought over with well over 1,000 Nazi scientists under Project Paperclip. And he operated in America under the name Dr. Green. So she took the name from that, really. And by that time, she had dyed her hair like a purple color because she's actually naturally blonde.
Yeah.
Because blonde-haired, blue-eyed genetics is kind of the one they like to use most.
What they supposedly use for these MK Ultra presidential models?
Yeah, there is this mind control project which came to light, and there were public hearings about it. All the real stuff was suppressed, mind. And the person who was put in charge of investigating it was Nelson Rockefeller, governor of New York 4 times, and oh dear, and he was actually appointed by President Ford, who was an operative in MK Ultra earlier on. But there was an offshoot of MK Ultra called Project Monarch, named after the monarch butterfly. It's why you see so many butterfly symbolism in a lot of celebrities and singers and actors and stuff. It's because it's the code for Project Monarch.
The sex kitten project.
Yeah, and of course these women and children who are put under mind control, they're sexually abused by the rich and famous. And then that compartment that experienced it is shut away. They call them alters, altered states. And another alter, what they call the front alter, is brought to the front of the mind, and that has not been abused. That alter, when the abuse was going on, was back in the subconscious. So it has no memory of the abuse.
Because the mind is compartmentalized.
Because the mind is compartmentalized by these techniques they use. But what happens is that as the mind gets stronger and stronger, these compartments can start to break down. And when they do, the memories held behind them flood into the conscious mind. I met so many of these people around the world. They have these photographic memories of what happened to them.
Supposedly another MK Ultra victim, Bryce Taylor, talked about in her book.
Right.
Thanks for the memories.
Yeah, I've met her, yeah. There are so many of them. It's because you asked me at the start of this little segment, is mind control the most important way that we're controlled? Well, absolutely
Yes.
it is. What is manipulation of perception? What is the manipulation of perception of the population? What is the manipulation of holding people in 5 sense reality alone? It's mind control.
Yes.
Perception control is mind control. We're talking now about focus on individuals who are then used in various ways through their mind control, including assassinations, by the way, and terrorism. But actually there's a mind control. The whole thing is about mind control.
Do you think that somebody like Arizona Wilder, even maybe Kathy O'Brien or Mark Phillips, who people talk about in different ways, I don't know.
Yeah, he's died now, Mark.
He died now, but some people claim, Kathy O'Brien says that he was her savior and he helped her, and some people say that he was actually her handler. And then there was a whole debate about her and Bryce Taylor, and everybody seems to support what the other one is saying. Could this Arizona Wilder thing and everything be a way to manipulate you? Because you became and have become probably the most famous figure within these truth circles.
But manipulate me to do what? I mean,
talk about things that are difficult for a lot of people to understand.
Okay, so they also manipulated Credo Mutwa, the Zulu shaman who's now in his 90s, to describe the Zulu legends of this reptilian race. You know, they manipulated these other ancient cultures who talk about the serpents, gods. They manipulated the ancient Chinese emperors who claim the right to be emperor because of their genetic descendants from the serpent gods. If you're trying to get information out that a system doesn't want circulating, well, of course, one of the defenses of that system is that it's so fantastic, people won't believe it anyway. Well, more and more people are starting to open their minds to it. But you also want to create chaos. You also want to create division. And what I say to people, because, you know, some of the most self-indulgent, up their own backside people I've ever met have been in the alternative media, frankly. It's not about the information, it's about them. And it's about what they think is more important. What I say is this. look at the totality of the information. Bryce Taylor talks about certain things, and Kathy talks about certain things, and Arizona Wilder talked about certain things. You look at the common themes that they all talk about, and what did you get? You get a massive mind control program run by the military, involving some of the most famous politicians, even entertainers like Bob Hope in the world. And so look at the common themes. But this is what happens, you see. They'll pick out something that's a bit really far out. I'll talk a lot of things that are far out. I'll talk about a lot of things that are not. And so they'll pick on that, and they'll go for that. And they'll say, oh yeah, but they disagree. So what? What does it matter? Look at the common themes. And then look at someone who's a whistleblower in modern times, and how what they're saying is happening fits with a Zulu shaman, fits with what people in other cultures are describing. If I was saying to people, you must believe what I say, and if you believe something else, well, that's crazy because you must believe what I say, then that's one thing. But what am I saying? Here is 30 years of research. Here is another way of looking at the world that is very different to the one that you've been told to believe in all your life. Make of it what you will. The last thing this world needs is someone else coming along and saying, I've got all the answers, you must believe me. You must follow me. People say to me sometimes, how many followers do you have? And I say, if I have one, they're not listening. It's not about following. The last thing, humanity got into this mess by following.
We don't need gurus.
We don't need gurus. We don't need all these priests and all these leaders to follow. We need information, and then the self-confidence and the self-awareness to form our opinions from as much information as we can get, rather than just that we're given by the mainstream. And that's it. You look at what Kathy has said about her reptilian experiences, where she saw Father George Bush's face turn into a reptilian form. She understandably, certainly when she wrote the book Transformation of America, perceived that to be her mind control being manipulated.
Yeah.
But then you talk to other people, including carriers of ancient knowledge, who describe exactly the same experience. And so, well, actually, it wasn't mind control, it was
what
a shift.
Happened.
It was what
according
happened.
To,
Yeah. So what you do is you take all these different sources of information, and then you put them together. And you're telling me something new, because I've not heard about Arizona Wilder for a long time, since many years, because you lose touch and stuff like that, and move on, but to other things. But is it any surprise that she's saying, well, no, I was under mind control? Is it any surprise? I mean, what the heck's been going on ever since?
Do you know where she is?
No, not now. She was convinced that they were going to bring her back. They were going to bring her back into the program. Oh. That's what she was very, very concerned about. So what the heck has happened to her since? We don't know. I'm just writing a book about 9/11. And the number of people on the inside or with expert knowledge who in the aftermath of 9/11 said, this is what happened, or this is what happened looked like to me, say a controlled demolition expert who has contracts with the government, and then suddenly a little bit later, oh no, I was mistaken. I didn't really mean that. Yeah, okay. So I don't know what's happened to Arizona Wilder, but she said nothing to me.
It was just in order to try and clear it up for people who have read these things and they're looking to the video and they want to see, what does David say about these things? What is happening?
What they need to do is not look to me. they need to look to this. What do you think?
But you're a very important source of information, in this awareness, truth
source
field.
of information, yes. But people must not make me or anyone else the arbiter of what they believe. They must not. They must take their perceptions back, so they're coming from them, not from an external source, whether it's me or the government. What I'm doing is I'm putting out information they wouldn't normally hear. And they must then make their own perceptual choices of what they believe and what they don't believe. So they have a unique perception to them and not someone else's off the bloody peg. So look at the information and come to your own conclusions. But, I would emphasize again, there's nothing I have said and nothing I have written that has come only from one person or only from two people. I mean, I have been on this road a long time. I've met a lot of people. I've been...
traveled the world,
I've been
many
over 60 countries, and new ones coming up all the time. So you do gather a body of knowledge, and more importantly, you gather a body of common knowledge coming from people who are not connected to each other.
And you evolve also.
Yeah.
During the years. So there are so many things to cover. Later on, we can cover other things that are very important as well now. But just the remaining moments.
Okay.
Is there hope for humanity? And what is the greatest wish that you have for our future?
Well, if control of perception and limitation of perception is how we're held in servitude, then how do we get out of it? And for me, it's self-identity. We stop identifying the I with the labels. The labels are just labels for experiences we are having in a very transitory little experience in a tiny band of frequencies. If we can self-identify with being the consciousness having those experiences, the eternal consciousness, in the knowledge that we can expand our state of awareness out into this infinite field of possibility, probability, insight, understanding, knowledge, wisdom. And the only thing that's stopping us doing that is our perceptions, our programmed perceptions that are holding us in a certain state of perceptual servitude. Then this perceptual servitude has collectively manifest the world we live in. We live in a prison world because we have prison minds. The one creates the other. You take the bars from the prison, then what that mind in its now new expanded state of awareness creates will be very, very different to the world we've had up to now. This is where the world's going to change. It's not going to change screaming obscenities at each other and waving placards. It's not going to change like that. It's going to stay the same. Consciousness has to change, because the consciousness that we've been in has created the world that we live in. Consciousness that we can go into will create a very different world. It's not for a laugh and a bit of fun that this global network works 24/7 to hold us in a perceptual servitude state. It's because without it, they cannot control us. There's 7.5 billion people, and there's a real seriously handful compared with 7.5 billion that are actually doing the manipulating. But the other important point is that there is an end game to this, which we need to become seriously aware of very, very quickly. In fact, it's in our face if we only could see it. And that is, up to this point, humanity has been controlled by the control of information, which has formed perceptions, which then manifest experience. That's been the process of human control. This end game is to go directly to the mind and feed the perceptions and the emotional states directly to us via artificial intelligence. This is why Silicon Valley, who I've been focusing on a lot recently, is talking openly, some of these gurus like Ray Kurzweil at Google, about the connection to the human mind of AI, which he's giving a timescale of 2030. And we're talking in 2018. I mean, hello. And he openly says that when we are connected to AI, as it becomes more and more intelligent than we are, will do more and more of human thinking until human thinking as we now know it will be negligible and then disappear, right? That's the end game, and that's what I call the assimilation. That's the assimilation of the human mind, human consciousness into artificial intelligence. So everything, every thought, every emotional state, everything will be fed to us. No need to control information even anymore, because you are directly...
Again, mind control.
Yeah, total. In fact, basically the human mind becomes like a computer terminal on someone else's internet. Now, this is being openly talked about. And if we allow this to happen, then where do you go from there? So this is why I, worked 7 days a week, travel the world trying to get this information out as much as possible. I talk a lot about this stuff in the talks and in the books now, because we've got to realize what's happening. All this stuff with 5G, it's a frequency level and a power of communicative energy, information, that is necessary for this mind control grid to operate. This is why they're upping it, making it more and more powerful and more dangerous for the human body. And why this 5G, which is being rolled out without any testing whatsoever, and the government agency in America rolling it out has admitted we're doing no testing because we don't want to delay it. And they're building this, what they call smart grid, or what Kurzweil calls this cloud, a technological sub-reality, which I've been warning about now for a long, long time was coming. Kurzweil calls it the cloud, I call it the technological sub-reality, to which the human mind is going to be attached. So we just become a computer terminal with no thought as we had before. And so then the question comes, why are people like Kurzweil telling us this? Because of the sales pitch. The sales pitch is, you connect to AI, you'll be superhuman, you'll be gods. That's the sales pitch. But actually the truth is we'll become subhuman. And human thinking, human perceptions.
So by expanding our consciousness and becoming more aware, can we choose spiritually in some way not to become part of this AI?
Well, if people become aware of what the game is, they become aware of the consequences of being attached to AI, then surely they'll refuse in very large numbers to become attached to AI. This is what I'm going around pointing out what's going on and why and what the game is. But if you are held within this band of frequency and you only get mainstream information, look at the media and stuff, the Silicon Valley gurus, they're selling to it as a good thing. I mean, look at it. Look at what's happened in a short time. They've got you addicted to smart technology, which you hold. They're now putting the smart technology onto your body with Bluetooth and Google Glass and Apple Watches, because it's a stepping stone. Where they want to get is inside the body, so the attachment to AI starts. And they're even doing that in Sweden. Thousands of people have been microchipped in Sweden. Yeah, just because they can then open a door without actually pushing it. Give your freedom away, give your mind away, but the door will open. You have to push it now. And it's happened over such a short time. And what it's doing, it's getting people addicted to the next stage, bang, gotcha. And AI connected to the human mind finished. That's the game.
So much to cover, and we could do several shows also about this and much more.
Oh,
and
sure,
you have written about 13 books, or how many have you written?
More, 20 odd now.
20 more. One is here, The Global Conspiracy. Infinite love is the only truth, everything else is illusion. And then your latest one, which is called Everything You Need to Know But Have Not Been Told.
Yeah, Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told.
Which is the tour that you're on this time.
There's a previous one called Phantom Self, which is about the way that we self-identify with labels instead of the real I.
And people can know much more about you by going onto your website, www.davidicke.com.
That's the one.
It's been absolutely wonderful talking to
real
you
pleasure,
again. It's
Lucas.
been really, really great. Thank
Cheers.
you so much,
No
David
problem.
Icke, for being here.
Lovely. Good stuff. All done.